Also, don't forget to unmute yourself when speaking and then mute yourself when you're done. And I'd also add the short disclaimer that this meeting is going to be recorded and shared throughout the Presbytery. It will be posted on the Cascades YouTube channel. That said, the other members of the task force are Dr. Carrie Brown. Carrie is a family physician. Carrie, can you wave? And she's now a contractor and a contact tracer in Grants Pass, and she is the clerk of session at Bethany Grants Pass. And Tim Winsley. Tim is a teaching elder serving the Presbyterian Urban Network as nurse theologian and instructor in nursing practice at the University of Portland. He may join us in a bit, but if you heard Brian say he was called away about half an hour ago for an automobile emergency. And Boyd Levitt is also part of the task force. Boyd is the finance manager at First Presbyterian in Bend, and he is not able to be with us today at all. And we've been working directly the last several months with Brian on behalf of the PLC and Steve Parker. So the overriding objective of our time today is to provide a forum in which each of us can ask, and collectively we can all discuss and answer questions related to reopening. Although we welcome questions throughout, and I'll try to keep track of that, and Sherry's gonna back me up, we would like to begin with a bit of structure. So let me briefly outline our proposed agenda. Brian's going to get us started by providing some context and perspective on behalf of the PLC. Carrie is then going to outline the current guidelines for Oregon and Washington. And then hopefully Tim, Carrie, and I will be able to quickly show you what we have on the website and our general thinking and how we've organized it and put it together. We then want to show you a 14 or so minute video by Macia McFee, who is a consultant on one of the best documents we've found relating to reopening, where she shares her thoughts and brainstorming on getting back into our sanctuaries. And then when we move through that, and we'll take questions as we go along, we'd like to completely open the conversation to questions and discussion. And again, I would just remind you, we'll take questions throughout because that's the most important thing we're going to do during this time. And we think that's going to be the most fruitful use of our time together. So Brian, why don't you get us started?
Be glad to. And the first thing is just to let you know how thankful I am for this reopening task force. Of course, all of this took us by surprise, and the first 4 to 6 weeks, the Presbytery office was trying to keep up with all the changing circumstances and information. And of course, we began to get overwhelmed by the amount of information that as different denominations and churches and medical professionals all stepped in with information on what was happening and how to address it. We ended up with dozens, if not hundreds, of different kinds of documents to work through and figure out which ones were applicable to the Presbytery. So we as staff got overwhelmed fairly quickly a few weeks into it, trying to keep up with all of that and also maintain the more normal, if there is anything like that left at this point, operations of the Presbytery. So we put together a task force of four very qualified people in our Presbytery, and it's been a real gift to be able to rely on them to handle all of the information, recommendations, going through all the different best practices and the different things that have been coming out. So I'm very, very thankful for them. It's also just really interesting having this take place right now. Things have shifted so quickly that had we been doing this 4 to 6 weeks ago, this probably would have been a very different workshop. At that point, I think there was some sense of the different counties that were opening up at different rates, and we were prepared to say, hey, these are the counties that can do this now, these are the counties that can do that, which churches. And so we were putting together this approach that was slowly working toward an extended reopening process. And now really as of 2 or 3 weeks ago, that feels like that's all changed again. There's the spiking across the country. I think 39 states where it's gone up, Oregon being one of those. And we all know there's another shift. I mean, you can feel it. It's like we're in another place now, trying to figure out what does this mean for our presbytery? What does it mean for our congregations? So in many ways, one of the things I'm looking forward to in this is that we will provide some information to you, but a lot of this also will be listening to your questions, your concerns, what are the things that you're going through as we continue to journey together. And because of those shifts, the PLC, Presbytery Leadership Commission, hasn't really had, we haven't had the need to really update our recommendations. The recommendations that we put in place about 2.5 months ago are still there. And we just need to keep on reinforcing those. So what I do want to let you know is basically the tone that the PLC has been taking in this. They have been using some basic foundational ideas to frame how we approach this, because we have seen in different places there have been different recommendations about how we should be moving through this, and so PLC has established the foundational approaches they feel will help guide us. So one is that we will rely on the medical science, and I think for that that has meant that we are following the governors and the state guidelines in both Washington and Oregon, and I think that's basically for the PLC. There's a level of expectation there, obviously, that that no congregation would do something that would be outside the actual regulations of the governor's office and the state regulations. And then in addition to that, because within that one could say, well, as soon as it's allowed, we can do it. And that hasn't been the approach of PLC. The approach of PLC has been more, something may be allowed, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's wise. And so there's been 3 things that the PLC has used in helping to make their recommendations. And one is that we would use from our faith, one of our deep faith values, the love of neighbor being one, a commitment to the common good or the common welfare of the community, and a Matthew 25 preference for the most vulnerable among us. And so those 3 things have largely guided how we have approached things and the recommendations that we have made. The third one especially is important for our congregations, because many of our congregations have a majority of folks who are over 65 and who have compromised health. And so it's not just the vulnerable populations in our communities, but also the realization that many of our congregations also have that demographic. And so it's a concern for our congregations as well as the larger community. So that's I think the basic approach that we've been taking. And there's been the congregations that have contacted us and asked, hey, is this okay to do this at this time? And I think one of the things we've been clear as staff, we've talked about the things that are actual regulations from the state that prohibit certain gatherings and certain sizes, and then there's been the recommendation from PLC as well. So I hope that's enough of a context for the moment, but I think as we get into questions, I'll be able to share more then as well. Joan, you're muted.
Broke my own rule. Carrie, do you want to go ahead and share with us where we are now in Oregon and Washington?
Sure. Thank you, Joan. You know, I thought it would be easier to just, you know, punch it in online and all of the recommendations would come up, but it's actually a little confusing. In terms of Washington, and if anybody has other information, let me know. Clark and Klickitat counties were at phase 2 and look to be on track to go to phase 3, but as of July 8th, they're holding at phase 2, which is it's what they call a modified phase 2. And so they're recommending that worship be done remotely or to drive-in service. If they do choose to meet, let's see, you can have outdoor services with up to 100 individuals, and that's excluding the organization staff, and you can have indoor services with up to 25% capacity or up to 200 people, whichever is less, as long as you can achieve the 6-foot physical distancing. And then there are some more specific rules about if you have a room with a door that leads outside and has restrooms, you can, again, 25% or 200 people. If there are multiple rooms, then there are some more specific recommendations, which I won't go into at the moment. But that's basically as far as I can tell, the most current, this is as of July 8th, recommendations for Washington. For Oregon, we do have an overall recommendation of wearing masks in all indoor spaces and in outdoor spaces if you cannot maintain at least 6 feet of distance separation. And within that, Clackamas, Washington, Multnomah, and Lincoln counties are still in phase 1. So they can have up to 25 people indoors or outdoors. All of the other counties in Washington are being held in phase 2 at this time. Indoors, they can have 50 people in general. Outdoors in general, it's 100 people, but for faith-based organizations, you can have up to 250 people. And then they have a lot of recommendations about limiting singing, limiting exertion and heavy breathing, etc. And so this would apply to they also have, both Oregon and Washington especially has some specific recommendations about going into the home, for instance, to have a Bible study or administer a sacrament. And that's obviously a smaller number of people that can attend for that. So that's kind of the overall status at the moment.
Does anyone have any particular questions related to what Carrie has said in particular? Okay. If not, Sherry is going to share her screen, and we're just going to give you a really quick overview of the material that's on the website. If you have not looked at it, I hope you're familiar with it to some degree.
So on the home page of the website, if you scroll down, you'll come to reopening, click on the link, and then you'll get the full lineup.
So Sherry, if you can go up to the top, we'll just kind of talk through our thinking and how we've organized it. So hopefully what we've thought in the sense that it made to us, it will make it clearer to you as well. We wanted to start with the overall guidance from the PLC and from Brian and the Presbytery staff. So any change to those basic recommendations from the Presbytery level will be the first thing you see on the website. So that was our main heading, PLC statements, guidance from Presbytery staff. And then the general documents, these are really the documents that we consider to be more or less required reading by every session. as they think through all the issues related to reopening. And I would say that this document we added on June 10th, Resuming Care-Filled Worship and Sacramental Life During a Pandemic, that was put together by an ecumenical consultation, a number of really well-respected people. That single document really, I think to us, is the most essential document that we want people to take a look at. That's why we put it there first. But then all of the other documents under this general heading are really critical from various medical communities as well as the larger denomination. And then we organized the next section. If you just had people in your church or from your session who had particular questions and you just wanted a quick answer to that particular question, we just threw those under frequently asked questions. And I would say to you that Carrie in particular has done a superb job with the medical questions, and she updated that information very recently with things regarding antibody testing and overall testing. And she's done just a fantastic job summarizing the best and latest scientific information there from the medical community. And then we've just, the question that everyone is asking is, when can my church facility reopen? And that's, we try to provide a basic outline there that's consistent with PLC's recommendations. And then under specific recommendations and things to consider, various churches have forwarded to Brian, and he has given to us their guidance, what their sessions have determined thus far. And we're very grateful that these churches have consented to sharing that information with everyone in the Presbytery. So if you want some kind of a template for what your session might be writing or doing or saying, you can look right there and see some really good recommendations. And then cleaning is something that everybody's going to have to be concerned with. That's the basic guidance from the CDC there. And then some other issues that are going to be challenges for all of us, contact tracing and PPE. Are we going to provide those things to people when they come into our facilities? How are we going to manage it? And then also just general questions regarding worship. And Tim has put together a really nice video about singing in worship and providing alternatives to singing in worship. And then if there are those among you who really want to take the deep dive, as we call it, there's a whole list of resources there from other denominations, from blogs. I'm going to upload a podcast that I listened to last week, this next week. But if you're just really want to go deep or have interest, I encourage you to look through the deep dive. But that's how we've structured this material, just hoping that it would be easily accessible and useful to all of you. Thank you, Sherry. So we want to go ahead and show this video from Macia McFee, just because I think it was released last week, and I think she's really hit the moment right in terms of where we are at this particular time in terms of thinking about getting back into our sanctuaries.
I'm not hearing this.
I'm not getting audio.
Yeah, there's no audio, Sherry.
So how about now? Let's go back. I was part of an ecumenical Does that work?
I can hear it a little bit.
Yes. Oh, barely.
Online worship. I realized that we're about to have to figure this out and to do our worship online. Now I'm coming to you.
I can't hear.
A lot of people are thinking about reconvening in the sanctuary. And I feel compelled to say a couple of things about that. So
That's good.
I was part of an ecumenical protocols consultation, and so got to read a lot about what research we know about. There were some CDC people on it, as well as theologians and liturgists, and lots of really good folks. And the more that I was part of this, the more I realized that, yes, I think we need to have these protocols to be safe when we come back, but I am still not a fan of coming back to the sanctuary. You know, just because this is not new anymore, 3 months in, doesn't mean that it's safer. It's still dangerous. We still don't have a cure. We don't have a vaccine, and we're not going to anytime soon. And so I am just not sure that it's wise to put ourselves in danger to come back and worship together in the space. I think a lot of people are really missing the sanctuary. But I think one of the things that we're missing is our experience of the holy that we remember that we have in the sanctuary. So for instance, I'm sitting in a spot in the sanctuary in this church where I was worshiping before we went into lockdown. And this is a place, I mean, I'm like a lot of people. I come in and I tend to gravitate toward a familiar spot. And that's because our brains love that. And we, in fact, begin to attach a feeling of the holy with a certain angle, a certain view. So there's like a real physiological, neurological reason why we like to sit in the same spot. Because our brain goes, oh, this is where I had a really spiritual experience once before, so it's possible I could have another one. And so when we come back in, I think a lot of people are yearning for the experience of being in the sanctuary, the experience of worship that their brains are telling them they're going to have. But actually, I think we're not really going to have that kind of experience when we come back. It's going to be very different. And a lot about what feels like worship, what feels holy, has to do with our experience of the look and the feel. I may not be able to sit in this spot that I have sat before, and so I might be sitting somewhere else, and already my brain's going to be a little uneasy. Like, what? Why are we sitting in a different place? And then we're not going to be singing together at all. And that's going to feel weird because the energy is going to affect the energy. And so the very energy of the space is going to feel different. We're going to be spread out. Those of you who are in big sanctuaries that used to be full, people have memories of them full, and then now they're not so full anymore, and people still spread out. I mean, as I have consulted with churches over the last 25 years, that's been one of the things that people have complained about, is that people spread out and it dissipates the energy, and it just feels like, early service feels, because we're so spread out. Well, that's the way it's going to feel, right? Even if your church usually feels vibrant, it's going to feel less vibrant because the energy is dissipated when we are separated. So that's not going to feel the same. It is going to feel, the experience of the sanctuary is going to bring us some comfort because the visuals, just getting to see it will be comforting. So what I want us to ask ourselves, how else can we get some of what we're yearning for without putting ourselves in danger? So I think we could do some thinking outside the box. I think we can think of some more creative ideas. One of the things I've been playing with recently is, what if there was a no-touch pilgrimage through the sanctuary, like a walkthrough? So, like, what if, those of you doing my Beguiled by Beauty series with the wind chimes, what if when you came in the front door, there was some wind chimes. So it's connecting to the online worship that you're doing, but little pieces of it are connecting in this kind of no-touch walkthrough, right? So what if we came in and we had, we have to do the same kind of scheduling and things that, and wipe down of the space and wearing masks and all of that we talk about in this document that I'm going to put in the comments below. So we have all those protocols and we space people out, and maybe we even put, like in the grocery store, little dots, little circles where you stand, and then when somebody moves forward, then you get to go to the next one. What if we walk through it? So maybe the organist is playing, or the pianist is playing, and so I get to be in my beautiful sanctuary, and I get to hear that beloved organ or piano or what have you, and I get to have some time to stop. Maybe we even put some signs on the pews, like we tape on the pews some scripture, or some words of prayer that people can experience as they're coming down and waiting in different spots. And what if then we get to come all the way up to the chancel? Again, no touch. Certainly not going to kneel at the rail. So we get to come here, and this is my last stop, is right here. I get to spend a moment. The candles are lit. I get to enjoy this beautiful space. And then this church actually has a great out because they have this side door. And so the side door takes us outside. I don't know. That's just like one example. When I was in Tahoe, there's this thing called Trails and Vistas, which is really cool. I'm going to go outside here. It's called Trails and Vistas. And it's, you go on a hike. And along the way, every once in a while, you would encounter some artists doing something. They're either playing musical instruments or dancing, or there's a piece of artwork that somebody has created that you go by. And it's just kind of this pilgrimage where you encounter art. Why don't we do that? I mean, you could actually come out here and then maybe continue on the walk, right? Maybe we even have some chimes hanging from the cross right there, or from some of the trees around. Oh, there's a bunny rabbit. Hi there, baby. Oh, and then there's bunny rabbits. Still talking about celebrating creation. Oh, so cute. Anyway, you can have arrows like in the grocery store one way. You can have places where people can stop, and maybe you have a little something, praise God for the flowers, a little signage in there. So it's kind of what botanical gardens are doing now that are opened up, or you can walk through, but it's no touch. So I don't know, you would have to decide what you could do in your space that's safe. Read those guidelines below. Really good guidelines about people coming into common areas. And of course, you need to check with your judicatories in terms of, some districts and conferences and regions are, you need to get permission to reopen in various ways. So we're really trying to figure out what it is that people are missing and to meet that need without it having to be like trying to do what we've done before in the sanctuary. So this encounter with the sacred space, this encounter with the grounds of the church that maybe people haven't visited for a long time. This is their peace pole. And, we can't do prayer stations where people are lighting candles or taking rocks or things. It's got to be no touch. But it could be prayer stations where people stop. And could be photographs that you set up in different places that invite different prayers, some intercessory prayer walk, all no touch. But it could even be something that if you laminate things or put them in a more permanent state, that people could come at any time. Although you want to make sure that you're letting people know that if there's somebody walking in the space, you don't want people too close together. So, you trust your people to self-monitor, but you might want to just do it as an event so that you can monitor the rate at which people go through. But maybe here on the, when they come out the door and they're here in this space, maybe there's a cellist over there. You know, somebody who's playing a musical instrument that's not a wind instrument, right? That's problematic, but a cello, or maybe it's a drum, maybe it's a drummer, you know, that, I mean, that's one thing that really can get the energy happening. Or maybe if your place is big enough, like this place, there's different places. You could have the cellist over on the other side of the building, which has a columbarium, right? So some beautiful music where people remember those who've passed on. And maybe on this side, there's a couple of drummers, you know? So you'll have to figure that out. But the point is to create a worshipful experience that meets some of our spiritual needs, some of our ritual, spiritual, spatial, energetic needs around community. That's a shared experience. It's shared because we all get to do it. And then maybe we debrief it on Zoom afterwards, right? We have a Zoom happy hour, Zoom fellowship hour, where we talk about our experience of it. So it's shared experience in shared space, but just not at the same time. And for those who would never come out at all, anyway, right? Even to do this, we're gonna record this. Maybe we even record this pilgrimage just with the camera as if you're doing it. And maybe when we get outside here, we have some music that we overlay on top of the video. So we make it accessible to people. You could digitally create something for smartphone, you know, so you could bring up something like the prayer station kind of things on the smartphone. Or I've done pilgrimages. I've created pilgrimages where I had narrated meditations that people would play as they walked through. So let's just get creative, folks. Let's not think that it's either or, that it's just online worship and in-person worship. Let's think out of the box, and let's think of all the different kinds of beautiful worshipful experiences that we can have without putting people in danger right now. It's just we just don't know enough, and it's too risky. And there's so many people that cannot even come out for a walk through. And so we want to find ways to be inclusive. And pastors, I know that it's a lot to produce online worship. If you add, because you're basically going to have two congregations, one congregation that can come and risk it, and one that cannot. And so I think you're going to be doing double work. I think you're going to be doing an online service and whatever you're doing in the space. And you know how tired you are right now, times 2 or more. Anyway, it's my opinion. It's my thoughts. I think so many of you are doing awesome things. It's been long enough. You're doing amazing things online. If you need any help, please let me know. Because we're in it for a while, I think. And let's keep supporting each other. All right, friends. My prayers are with you, whatever you decide. And I know just the deciding is really hard. But let's think of some ways that we can answer the need that people have for deepened spirituality, for seeing their sacred spaces, for music, for what have you, even in those ways that even in this time where it's just not going to be the same to come back, even if we try to reproduce, minus the singing, minus the communion, it's not going to feel the same. And so it could actually create a lot more grief, rather than more comfort to try to do that. Anyway, thanks, bye.
So thank you, Cherry, for figuring that out. And one of the key takeaways for me in her video is to ask the question, what are people missing? And then how can we meet that need of the things that they are missing? And just the encouragement to try to get creative about that, and get creative in using our spaces, even if we're making the choice not to worship together in the same way. So I hope that was helpful to you. I see we've had a number of questions so far, so let's open it up and get started. And I think Valerie Lyons, that was the first question I saw from you.
You want me to say it?
Sure, please, so we can all hear it.
Okay. Our church rents to another congregation. So one of the things we've been thinking of is how do we even make that work? Because we would surely have to clean between each service. And anybody have any thoughts on that?
Sure,
Valerie, I think
I'll jump in if no one else is at this moment. Yes, and Carrie can speak specifically to the medical deep cleaning. I think what we're understanding is that maybe it isn't quite so important to wipe everything down, although we need to wipe down frequently touched things. But do you have the capacity to air your place out? And are you able, what kind of ventilation do you have? Those are the kinds of things that you have to consider. There will need to be some level of cleaning between different groups being in the same space. But I think the bigger questions, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, are going to be around air circulation and what kind of airflow do you have in a given space.
I agree with Joan, and there are very specific guidelines as far as cleaning that you can find on the website. They're quite extensive. And again, it is primarily, you want to avoid people touching things, so have your doors open so they don't have to touch the doorknobs, then you don't have to clean them. So the less people touch, then the less cleaning you have to do. It's going to be less important. You don't necessarily have to do a deep cleaning of, say, the cushions on pews every time somebody sits in them. But I think that obviously really important is to be sure that the other congregation is following all of the rules as set down in the guidelines. And as Joan said, the ventilation, if the further apart the services are, the less chance of there being spread between the congregations. And I'll put in a little plug for public health. This is in the guidelines and it's recommended everywhere. If you can have a list of people who do attend the services, and even better, where they sit, then in the event, heaven forbid, of a case of COVID or somebody 2 days later coming down with COVID, you can immediately trace the people that were sitting nearby and or might have interacted with them. So that can be an important thing to ask the other congregation to do. But Joan's right. It's going to be, touching surfaces is a relatively easy thing to deal with. It's making sure that the other congregation isn't singing or not wearing masks or not following your guidelines. And then any ventilation you can provide, opening doors, windows, etc., is going to be helpful.
Well, that's fine in the summer, but in the winter, that's going to be really cold.
Yeah, I think winter is gonna be a whole other set of challenges. And the amount of information we have about this virus is just every single day is increasing exponentially. So I think we're all going to be thinking about winter, and hopefully there'll be some good suggestions, and we'll know more as churches and groups do gather. We'll have a better, if we can get everyone's cooperation with the contact tracing, we will have better advice. And the real disaster so far, the church disasters as far as COVID have had to do with people not masking and speaking out loud or singing. So I think we'll be able to meet in the winter time and just do our best with the ventilation, and maybe a shorter service. Maybe the services are going to be shorter because we're not going to have the meet and greet, and we're not going to have the singing, and so that may be a way to mitigate. It's all about mitigating risk. We can either all hide in our homes and not speak to anyone, or we can mitigate the risk to where it's unlikely we'll have a problem. And as was mentioned before, we can keep our most vulnerable people, hopefully, away from dangerous situations. So that's all I'll say.
And
Alan?
Valerie, I think that the tone of the PLC, the Presbytery Leadership Commission, is still urging caution. So that you're asking questions, well, how are we going to do this? And I think PLC would say, if you're not confident that you can kind of mitigate the risks in the way that you're comfortable, to wait until you feel more confident about that. Part of our experience at the Presbytery is we needed to put one in-person Presbytery meeting together about 3 or 4 weeks ago, so we could pass some bylaws that allowed us to have an electronic meeting. And Paul spent a great deal of time trying to figure out how to get everybody in a room where there was social distancing, and he did a great job at it. But even so, he said, I just couldn't keep people from passing by each other, changing chairs. As much work as he put in, he still found that there were issues with trying to make sure he mitigated all the risks. So, I think we're still in the place where PLC is saying there are things that are permissible or allowable, but maybe not necessarily wise yet.
Allison, I saw you raise your hand. Did you have a question related particularly to this as a follow-on to Valerie's? You're muted. Allison, you need to unmute yourself. Allison,
Hear me now?
there we go. Well, now we can hear you.
Well, somebody already said what I was going to say. I didn't know how to write it in, that take a picture so you know where everybody's seated. Somebody already said that, so that's all I was going to say.
Okay, thank you for that. And Josh Dunham, can you share your question with the group and we can get the group to respond?
Yeah, my question is regarding insurance liability. I heard from a fellow pastor that their insurance company said that the church is liable for costs that incur due to treatment, etc., if somebody gets COVID while in your church building. Has anybody else heard this from their insurance companies?
So I'd be glad to share, Josh, that we contacted our insurance company, which is now Church Mutual, and they said that as long as you were following CDC guidelines, that you were covered.
And I will second that from what the Presbytery has heard so far. We do encourage you to talk to your own insurance companies. However, what we are hearing repeatedly is that as long as you, exactly what Lauren said. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and I'm with Calvin Presbyterian in Tigard, and our insurance said the same thing. They did, however, say that does not keep you from being sued and having to go to court to defend yourself. It just means that you will probably win the suit.
I'm from First Medford. Our insurance company said the same thing. We have liability, but as long as we show due diligence, then we would probably win a civil suit.
We've checked with our insurance as well and have a similar response, with the caveat that groups that meet in our building must have and submit to the session their own guidelines for their gatherings. So that might be something that Valerie might consider too with this church that's meeting in your sanctuary.
That's part of what I was going to say is I have been meeting with the ministry groups that utilize our building and the other congregation. And I think what gives me confidence is when our session put together before you enter the building, what we need an agreement about. This is the way we're going to operate. And as I met with different organizations, if there was any inkling that they were not on board with cooperating with contact tracing, cooperating with social distancing, cooperating with following the guidelines that we'd set up, then we continued the conversation rather than granted permission for that to begin. We kind of did these groups, this is our basic plan, but each group needs to be in conversation with you about being on the same page about the principles, like what Brian laid out. If they're not on the same page with you about that, or if they express doubt that the members of their organization can or will follow that, then we keep talking, but we don't grant permission. And I think taking the time to work on the relationship and being all of one mind has been helpful in having a sense of peace that the space is not going to pose a risk to people, and the coming to the space is not going to pose a risk any more than stepping out of your house is going to pose a risk for you, which there is some.
A follow on to that, what is the process by which the particular churches submit their guidelines to Presbytery?
I'm not sure who's speaking, but
I'm sorry.
are you talking about
Ken?
Ken, yes. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, submitting guidelines for approval or just for information?
Approval.
Yeah, so the session actually is the one that approves. So the Presbytery is definitely offering recommendations and urging certain things, but your session is the one that makes those decisions. And so for the Presbytery, the bigger issue is that if you do something that doesn't follow the regulations of the state, then the Presbytery could step in. But beyond that, we're going to make you strong recommendations, and then it's really up to your session to make those decisions.
Okay, you kind of broke up there a little bit on me, Brian. Did I understand correctly then? Our session does have guidelines that they've established and have implemented. Are we required to submit those for approval to Presbytery?
You are not.
Thank you.
We are collecting those as templates for other congregations, but you are not required for approval.
Is it Margene McIntyre? I believe you have a question for the group.
Yes, I'm from Bandon, and my question isn't on going into the sanctuary, but setting guidelines, and when do you decide to allow small groups, prayer groups, Bible study groups to meet at church? I'm open to ideas, suggestions.
At our site, we have some Bible studies that, because of the limitations of access, some people are in the building and some people are by Zoom. And we have worked to make sure that those without access are not denied the opportunity to continue their life of study in faith. We looked at the size room, the arrangement. We actually took furniture out so that there are only the number of chairs and in the spacing that would be helpful. And we're working on that, but it required a group by group, activity by activity assessment of how many people are likely to be there. What would we do if there were too many people? Who could participate electronically? who would only be able to participate if they were able to come to the church building and be in the room, and then put a plan together for each individual activity and configuration of folks participating to make that work. As pastor, I honestly count how many different people I interact with over the course of a week. And when I'm up to 10 people outside my household, that's kind of the maximum that I feel like I can actually interact with in person. So that's part of the limitation. And we're not used to thinking about that. How many people have I interacted with today? But that's part of the work that we have to do to be mindful of safety at this time, I believe.
So what you're recommending is that we have a set of guidelines as to how we want this group to, what do I want to say, behave, and the limit on the number. We're a small church, so this group would be small.
Yeah,
And
we are
when
too.
I'm saying small, it might be fewer than 10 people.
Right, we are too, and so we're comparable. I'm very familiar with Bandon and more than, I mean, so some things that were done in a classroom, we've moved to the chapel or the sanctuary because there we could really spread out.
Well, in our case, it would be the fellowship hall.
Right. So something like that is it, but every single congregation and every group is going to be different in that regard. So that's what's worked for us. We have one set of guidelines. Think about these things before you come to the building, when you enter the building, while you're in an activity, how you conclude the activity. If it arises at any time that someone gets sick, that they have a person that they can notify. We have the blessing of having Tim Winsley as our Presbyterian Urban Network nurse. And so he serves as a consultant for us, but the information and stressing that information is confidential. Even the contact tracing, there's a confidentiality in that. We're not giving that information just willy-nilly to anybody. We give it to the health department.
Does each church have a contact tracer within your church, or do you rely on somebody in the community?
My understanding is, and one of the best recommendations I've seen, is that you have literally a sign-in sheet posted on your entryway, on your door, so that anyone who enters the building signs in. But really the thing that every group needs is their identified attendance taker, if you will, or contact tracer, so that someone is responsible for knowing who attended what meeting on what day or what group, so that, that contact tracing is possible. And some of the church mutual documents and some of the general documents specify that, yes, you need to have someone identified who is essentially your role taker, if you will, who is going to manage and be responsible for contact tracing. There isn't anyone outside. Someone in the church office is going to get the call saying someone in that used your facility has been identified as being positive. Who did they meet with? The question is going to come to you.
Right.
It's going to the church.
We have 4 anonymous groups in our building, and we have required that they at least at minimum put the contract tracing information in a sealed envelope and write the date on the outside, so that were we to need to have that, we could give that to the health department, and we wouldn't even necessarily open that. So that's the way we've dealt with it, trying to think of who might object to this and how might we honor the needs of a group, but say this is going to be something that we make every effort to cooperate with. And part of that is having the discussion so that people get mindful of it, just like we have the discussions about sexual misconduct prevention and child safety prevention. Is if everybody's on the same page, of course we're going to make this a safe place. It's a lot easier.
Right, and then there are specific guidelines in the documents on the website. I believe, and Carrie, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you need to save those rosters basically for 3 weeks to be safe, and then you can discard them, you can destroy them. But you just need to keep them on file long enough to be useful if they're needed.
I'm writing as you're giving me ideas. Thank you.
Sure. And let me see who has the next question. Carol Powers,
Oops.
want to share your question with the group?
Yes, I just wanted to know that the statement about 250 people outdoors in phase 2. I was just reading the OHA stuff before. I haven't seen that. Where is that?
You know, I found that on a Oregon Live News report on the, I think it was mid-June announcement that Governor Brown made, and I haven't found an official I saw your question, so I'm looking for the actual website that would give the official transcript, and I haven't found it yet, but I will keep searching. And if we haven't found it by the end of this conversation, I'll find it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Carol and Carrie. Steve?
Haven't those guidelines been changed since June? I mean, the governor came out just in the last few days with different guidelines. So the fact that it's there from June, I don't know that that's relevant anymore.
Yeah, and I thought the new guidelines had to do with gatherings, non-religious gatherings, but I'm looking into that. And if I don't find it by the time this is over and the official, it's very difficult to find these things on the Oregon.gov website. I'm not even sure they're there. But if I don't, I'll post it on the reopening website somewhere. But I'm looking now. I'll try to find it.
Could I have a follow-on to that, because it's relevant? The thing, are we not a gathering? It's clear that we're not a social meeting, or there were 2 words that they used, but it seems like we are a gathering.
We are a gathering, but my understanding was that and we need to meet all the requirements for a gathering, although at one point anyway, she allowed churches to be separate from other gatherings, like musical events and other things. So, but I'll find out for sure if there was any change from that. But they were excluded from that 100 person, at least at one point recently.
Thanks.
So could I weigh in for just a minute on this? Because the governor said there was, that we were to pull back to meetings indoors of less than 10 people, and it was aimed primarily at social gatherings of families and friends, and businesses and churches were excluded from it. This is where it seems to me the question of what's permissible and what is wise comes into play. So if it's not wise for families to gather in groups of 10 or more, my question is, how should we read that as the church, even though we've been excluded from the mandate? I just don't, I understand the political reasons why it gets outlined in that way, that it's different for one group of people than another group of people. But in terms of our decision making and safety, it seems to me that if gatherings of more than 10 are problematic, it's going to be just as problematic at the church.
Yes. Brian, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just that's a reinforcement of, I think, how PLC is addressing this and approaching it. And Lauren is on PLC. We have gone back to this issue of what's permissible compared to what's wise. And even though this hasn't come directly from PLC, one of the concerns in the staff now also that is guiding our decisions is that we really don't want our individual congregations or the presbytery to show up in the news. One of the things that's happening is that when we stretch this and begin to gather in a way that may be permissible, but it's getting ahead of the coronavirus in terms of what we actually know, in terms of knowledge. I think that's where PLC's nervous, is that we're still not quite sure what we're really dealing with here. And so there's more of an urge of caution. And you've seen across the country where there have been church gatherings where they've decided to go ahead and do what is permissible. And then it turns out 17 people get it, goes to the community. And so it's just this sense that we really don't even know for sure what we have, what we're dealing with here. And so just we're still urging caution in this across the presbytery.
Yeah. And Steve, do you want to ask your question?
Is this the one about the air conditioning?
Yes.
In one of the earlier conversations, I was thinking, like in our church, our air conditioning isn't flow through. It just circulates in the room and it goes out. And I'm wondering if there's any information that the presbytery has about what types of filters we could put into our air conditioning systems that would prevent the virus from circulating.
Carrie, do you have anything specific on that?
I have not. I have read a lot about that, but I haven't found anything that seems to be proven. There are a lot of thoughts about it, but I haven't found anything that people seem certain about. But I can keep an eye out for that. I mean, there's certainly, where I think that was Texas, that the people announced that they had a filter that was 100% effective, which of course it wasn't. And I don't think unless it's a brand new public building, most buildings aren't designed to completely recirculate all of the air in one room within a matter of an hour or two. So even if you have a good filter, the nicest thing for a church in reopening is that if you just meet on Sundays, you've had your 7 days without anyone in the room, which seems to be enough to be safe without sterilizing the air. But if you're going to use it more frequently than that, then it's more of an issue.
So I checked in with 2 different HVAC companies, and there are no filters that will filter out the virus. There are what they call scrubbers, and we have one in our home that is a small one. We inherited it when we bought the house, and supposedly it will kill 80% of viruses, but it's a heck of a thing to try to keep clean all the time. Those would be very, very expensive to add to your HVAC system if you bought it at a commercial size, and that's why hardly anybody does. But filters won't do any good. So if you're thinking about changing a filter, there are no filters that will filter a virus.
Yeah, and actually it was Dream City Church in Phoenix that made the claim initially that got publicized, and then that claim was removed of clearing the virus to 100%. That claim was removed from their information within 24 hours. So they said it initially and then they retracted it. All right, Steve asked that question. Have we answered everyone's questions? Does someone else have another question that they'd like for the group to discuss?
This is Michael Talbot from Salem First. I have one if possible.
Please.
I'm curious to know if anyone has found a tool, electronic tool, tracking mechanism or something. We have Planning Center here in Salem that we use to keep track of congregation members and their contact information and so forth. And we've thought about how we might use that to better track who participates in activities. And other than employees right now, this is not much of an issue because we're not doing much. But in thinking about moving forward, I'm curious to know whether or not anyone has given this particular problem any thought and what ideas people have. Thank you.
Anybody want to take it on? I mean, I know that every church uses a different church management system, and some of those church management software systems do have check-in, basically a check-in app, and that's really useful. So the larger churches that have the more sophisticated church management software systems and utilize them, contact tracing would definitely be easier using that. But I have not checked individually with each private company that has a church management software, but I would assume that automated church systems, Shelby, Church Track, all of those have some means of aiding in contact tracing.
I think this may be a case where simplicity solves both the privacy issues and compliance. So a really good check-in list that says what time you enter, what time you leave, what the name of the group that you're in with. You can stick those on a file and shred them and have it never show up on a file, which may be beneficial. Linda spoke to that earlier, and I think there is some wisdom in actually being pretty low tech on your attendance system.
The low tech option also has the advantage of being usable by those who are not techie. And since we have a lot of older members of our congregations who may not even have computers or cell phones, a piece of paper is the way to go.
Any system where you can guarantee the greatest compliance and filling it out is probably better. And I think the sign-in sheet does that.
Yeah, and just thinking about sign-in sheets, I appreciate the people that have really thought all the way through this. And that is, you don't want to pass it around and pass a pen around. You have one person doing the recording, one person keeping track of it and touching things. You know, just simple things can make a huge difference. So simple is good, but consistency is the most important thing.
May I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure.
So when you're using the check-in list, so are you suggesting that then you would have somebody there with the list and then writing the information down rather than each person coming in writing their own down, or?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So
one of the things that we have done is we have asked people to let us know more. Are you planning on coming? Reservations, if you will. I know that's a hard thing, and that is something that people have gone a long way away from. But then a lot of times I just make a little spreadsheet that has the names of the people who said they were going to be participating in that group and the dates that that group is anticipated meeting, what room they meet in, and then someone can just check off, and if someone comes in halfway through the meeting, they can make a note of that. That works out fine, and I'll truthfully, I mostly do that, and I use it also as an opportunity to say, you know, thank you, Patty, for coming. It's good to see so-and-so by Zoom. Thank you, so-and-so, for being here. That person-to-person connection is something that people are really longing for. To be noticed and recognized is a good thing. Now, again, you know, our anonymous groups, it's a different story. But we tried to think through those things, and each of the groups in our building identified a person that was going to be, or two people actually, that were going to be of support to us, and seeing that that group followed guidelines, were greeted warmly. There was a plan if too many people arrived for the meeting that was there, a compassionate plan. If somebody shows up because they're distressed, you know, maybe somebody steps out of the meeting and says, here, take this place. And I'm not talking physically take that space, take another seat, not the one I was just sitting in. But those things helped us think through how to be very relational in this, and see that as a ministry opportunity rather than just a chore.
And just keep in mind, you need a name and a phone number. You need a way to contact the person. So if you're going to have people in the building, you need to know their name and their phone number, just as a bare minimum. Are there any other questions?
I have some questions about a sense of support for the folks that are limited in their electronic access. And I see things at times, like in Multnomah County, they'll sometimes publish information about, oh, Comcast and CenturyLink are going to do free internet access for someone. We haven't really gotten the sense that that is really true, no strings attached. And people are anxious not to sign up for a service right at this moment that the company then gets to convert into an automatic withdrawal from your checking account, that kind of thing. But when our presenter about worship was talking about 2 congregations, I really think there are 3 congregations. There will be in person, there will be electronic, and then there will be those that cannot attend and do not have access. So I'm curious about some ways, you know, in the olden days, our deacons did cassette tapes of the service and then took it to people to play in their homes. Later, we had to provide the cassette players too, because nobody had cassette players anymore. But I'm wondering about that in terms of helping our folks get access to equipment, and then recognizing the limits of, even if we make access and even if we have equipment, some of our folks are not going to, by habit or cognitive ability at this point, have access. So what do we do?
I hope someone can correct me and tell me I'm wrong. I believe I just heard recently that the specials, the internet specials, the cut rates, all of that for people who did not have access, and for churches where they lowered the rates, I believe all of those specials are ending at the end of July. So I believe that those good deals will no longer exist going forward. I hope I'm wrong, but that was the last thing I believe I heard. You know, you can call in to Zoom on the phone. And so most everyone has access to a telephone. So I think just for those folks that don't have computers, relying on the telephone has become critical. So I would just encourage you to try to help people find ways to use the technologies that we already have.
This is Adrienne St. Helens. Can I interject here?
Please.
I'd like to take it a step further in that we have folks in our congregation in particular that have mental limitations as well as physical limitations. We have some folks that are certainly vulnerable and high risk that are in their 90s, and they're not going to do technology. And so I'm with the other statement that said we have this third congregation, and how do we include them, feel whole? And I will tell you that an example of that for me is my mother, who will be 94 in another 6 or 8 weeks. And for her, technology, although we have it in, it's not something she's comfortable with. She won't join the Zoom meetings. And yet she totally totally misses the people in her church that she has been a part of for over 50 years. So, you know, I'm open to suggestions and ideas that others may have. We're trying to do connections where we can, but we do have people that I so pray for, that I'm so worried about, that are separated from us now. And this isn't going to end anytime soon. Our building isn't going to open anytime soon. We're small. Our space is somewhat limited. And again, with our population, they're pretty high risk. So I'm open to ideas and suggestions, not necessarily on this phone call immediately, but you know, that we can even pass through Presbytery that would help us to reach those people, because they're totally in my heart all the time. Thank you.
Adrian, I can share what one congregation is doing, who described their church fairly similarly to yours. And for those folks that really aren't interested or able to do either Zoom or conference calls, they have gone to making sure that bulletins are mailed, and even sermon copies are mailed, so they have those for Sunday morning. So they're not participating in the same way like on a Zoom, but at least they still have, you know, the liturgy, the sermon in print.
And Robert, I see you've got a good comment here in the chat. Do you want to share that idea verbally?
Roberta Schlechter.
Oh, Roberta, I'm sorry.
Yes, at St. Andrews, we have one woman in particular, a longtime member of the church, who is elderly. She lives at a distance and she doesn't have any Wi-Fi, and she's not cognitively capable of holding the phone and doing the whole dial-in thing, plus which that can use up a huge amount of cellular data. So about 3 weeks ago, we started, and Pastor Sarah is putting together a rotation of people who receive a file of the portion of the Zoom service that is the moment with the children, then the scripture, then the sermon, then the song that follows the sermon. And that file is emailed to one of us. We download it and then take our computer to the lady's apartment, and she can watch it, watch that portion of the service. And so she not only has the connection to the service, but she has the connection to another human being who is a member of the congregation. She lives a pretty isolated life, and so we're blessing her on several levels.
Several others of you have really great ideas in the chat. Do you just want to share those verbally for those who aren't following the chat? So we've got Denby or High Creek or High Seas.
And if I can speak up, what we're doing is we record our church service early in the week, and then we have it available on Sunday mornings. But for people who can't get that, we create a DVD that has our service and our Zoom fellowship time after the fact. And then we either take that to them or we mail it to them.
Just one of the things I was saying was that there are other programs out there that for those who can't go through the process of calling into Zoom and putting in the password and making sure they can get in, you can actually call them directly from the meeting. So you're placing the call as opposed to them. So that just gives them another option. I do love some of the other ideas there, and especially the personal touch. I mean, that's always, for me, that's always like the best route. So as much as we can do that, that's the better way to go. But
Perfect, thank you.
This
any
may be
other
very
questions?
delayed because of our. So this is Denby, and our internet is very slow, so this will be delayed. So we have sometimes served coffee during the regular time at church during the coffee hour. And we thought it would be nice during the Zoom coffee hour that people could have cookies. And so we drove around to everyone and delivered cookies, but at the same time, we had Zoom on our cell phone. And so when we came to the front door of a home, the people could say hi to that particular individual, and that individual could say hi and be part of the coffee time. And we always used masks and distancing and everything properly. We've never touched the cookies by hand, so those were relatively safe, we think. But anyhow, that was another thing that we did.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Are there any further questions?
Sure.
I know we have a question, and that is really, how can our task force and or how can PLC be helpful to you? What could we be putting up? What could we be doing that would make your lives easier?
If I could mention one other thing, I happen to know that Pastor Sarah chairs the Presbytery Committee on, is it Communication and Technology? I think that's the title of it, or that's pretty close. They used to give out typically $4,000 grants, and they could give out a few of them. What they've been doing more recently is giving out grants of $1,000 going to churches, so that churches might use some of the funds to buy, if you've got someone who's got a laptop but they need a camera for a Zoom meeting, or they need speakers, the church has a little pot of money that they can use to purchase those items, so that someone at home can participate in a Zoom meeting.
Thank you.
I would say for the task force, I really appreciate the clear, concise list on the Presbytery website. I find the print information is very helpful, and I can sort through it. So much of the stuff, including all of our insurance company, wants you to watch a webinar of theirs, and I don't have time for their webinar. I can take the slides from their webinar and I can read that faster than doing that, and take out the things that I want. So I think the way you've put together the resource page has been very helpful. And at one point, I mean, you all spoke to the overwhelmness. At one point, I think I was probably reading 100 pages a day of input. And so to have had another group call through and offer some of the best that's there is helpful. I actually do not look every single day, but I actually do follow the Oregon Health Authority feed that they give, and you can just sign up to get that link. And so then when people are sending out a lot of misinformation, as they are on social media, as they are in the, well, I heard that there was no one that was going to be allowed to have any live music inside or outside now. I have a place that I'm fairly certain if I go there, hasn't been manipulated by the latest political whims and does have clear information. Sometimes it's hard to follow, sort through. So that's why I appreciate that your site gives me a quick first place to go and say, well, has somebody else already thought about this? So thank you for your work, all of you.
And we are updating it, as one of our groups sees something that we're like, oh, this is really good and new. We are updating the website as we receive that information. And I'm asking Steve to go ahead and put the date in on something new, like it was added July 13th. That was the last time we added something, was on July 13th. And we'll have a couple of additions tomorrow. So I'm trying to get him to include that date so it's apparent when something is new.
It is
And,
very helpful for
Joan,
us. If you do send in kind of requests, we can put material on that we think makes sense. But if there is specific things that you are struggling to understand or need, please reach out, and we can be kind of the vetting body to help make sure that gets posted.
And that's Tim. He was able to join us. He's the other member of our task force.
We had a family emergency. I'm sorry that I rescued my wife, and it took me a while to get back. So.
And I'll just, someone was kind enough, oh, excuse me.
No. If there was a way to compile the creative ideas, because hearing the other resources that are alternatives to Zoom that HiC's brought up, hearing about taking things to people's houses, those are incredible resources. And I feel like we're kind of Jesus stuck with the leper community, and we're trying to figure out how to touch them and make them know that they're loved and that they're important. And there's a lot that's in between us and them. And so hearing those kind of creative solutions of how we can reach out, bring healing, and touch those who are isolated and kind of hopeless in the moment, I think hearing those resources is absolutely vital. It's really helpful. Thank you for everything people's sharing.
I would also just say we have in our congregation, we're tiny. We're 18 members at this point, and a constituency of about 75 people that if they walked through the door, we would know who they were, and we wouldn't be asking them, how did you hear about us? But within that, there are 4 generations of adults and 2 generations of children or youth. And what works for each of those, it is not by generation. Some of our 20 and 30 something lost their internet access when the library shut down, and they were primarily using computers at the library and the internet access at the library. And so I think we, all 6 of those generations, and within that, the needs, truthfully, it's the little ones that are doing great. I don't care what anybody says about not school. Our families are so fortunate to be able to have fun with soap bubbles and the water hose, that they are not the ones that are really struggling. Sometimes it's the invisible 20 or 30 something that is worried about the rent moratorium being lifted, and that they're going to get stuck with being on the street.
That's really helpful.
Joshua, that's a really good point. We'll try to compile these good ideas and put them up. And so I would say that we'll try to pull this information out of this recording from here. But if you do have a good idea, I would say if you can email it as well, we'll compile it and we'll add it to the materials for sure.
Thank you. That's great.
I'd like to see some sample guidelines from different churches. I've taken multiple pages of notes on ideas, on details I hadn't thought about, and it would be helpful to not start from ground zero.
You're not. All that information is already on the website. So if you just go to the Presbytery's website, the reopening page, and you scroll down a little bit, we've got letters from a variety of churches from around the Presbytery where they've outlined their procedures. So there's all kinds of examples.
Okay.
Yeah, you do not have to start from scratch.
I wasn't looking in the right place, because I'm on the website now.
And we appreciate, as your church develops them, if you will share them with the Presbytery, if you're willing to, then we will post them so we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. And Lauren just asked if Macia McFee's video is available. We are going to try to make that available. I am a member of her worship design studio, so I have access to her material. I'm going to try to get permission from her to share that globally, but I'm not 100% certain that we're going to be able to do that. So yes, we're going to try. And Tim, why don't you share that comment?
Just, they've been doing a lot of studies on how this is affecting various people, and children, I think it was under 8, the happiness quotient has across the country gone up. So, I mean, for all the misery that's happened, the children who have their parents at home and see their parents involved in meaningful work have a very different experience of quarantine than maybe the rest of us. That, of course, is not universal across every family, but there is some question about what are the long-term effects for young childhood to have parents at home for a year, and will we see we'll see longevity studies on if that affects how they view their life. So it's interesting. There are some benefits.
It's nice to kind of draw to a close on a positive and happy note. And please, I mean, if there is any way that we can assist you, that's why we're doing this. We want to be helpful to you in churches. So please let us know what you need and what would be most helpful for us to do as we go forward. And Brian, do you want to have the last word and close us?
You know me too well. Yeah, just a reminder that we're all in this together. So much of what we have put on the website is because we've been listening to you and others, and the recommendations and things that you've come across. All we've really done is organize a lot of that. So as Joan said, with the ideas that you have, whether it's the guidelines for your own congregation as you think about returning to your building at some point, or whether you have creative approaches now to that worship experience that Marcia was talking about. We want to hear those, because we may find ourselves in a place in 2 months where we have a whole link just about the creative worship that's come up. We already have a link for all the online streaming that's happening, but we'll do as much as we can to support you, but at the same time, we're also following you as well. We're all doing this together, so appreciate this time together. Prayers are with you. There's the prayers for patience and courage and wisdom. But even by Zoom, if we can somehow hold hands as we go through this process together.
And I'm sorry, it looks like I missed one hand up. CJ?
Oh, I was just going back to the when you asked about what could be done to help. And I know one of the things that we struggle with, we're a small church in Kaiser, and is finding those resources and having to sort through what is gonna work, what has worked, what will work. And I'm speaking more towards like the technology side, because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. And I know that's been said over and over again in this meeting. And I know that we struggle with things like video editing and getting copyrights and making sure we're following all those rules. So more on the logistics side of it, as opposed to the health side of it. That was just kind of what I was thinking about, having those resources available.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize if I missed anyone else. All right, well, thank you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for making this possible.
Welcome. Thank
This
you
has
all.
been helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Blessings.
Blessings.
Blessings.